Hey guys, welcome to Through the Bible Verse by Verse, a plain and simple study through the entire Bible, book by book, chapter by chapter, and verse by verse. We are currently in Genesis chapter 2, and we're talking about, or at least we're going to get into today especially, what is God's definition of marriage? Um, so, where we are now, of course, is the first 6 days of creation. God created the heavens and the earth. Then we see that God created man for that earth. God then prepares the Garden of Eden, the most spectacular, beautiful garden probably never seen by man, right? By man other than Adam. And he places Adam, his man, whom he makes in his image, in his likeness, and that's very important. And then he puts man in there, but he creates man for the need of relationship. He creates man for the need of relationships. And so when he places man in the garden, he first gives man his duties. Hint, hint, for those of you men seeking marriage. And then he also tells man what his limitations are. In other words, he gives man the command not to eat of the tree of good and evil. And then he says it is not good for man to be alone. And then he takes man through this whole series of bringing every creature on the earth, made from the dust, made from the ground, every creature, birds, cattle, everything, animals, wildlife, what we call wildlife. They're not wild at that time. So there's no fear of getting eaten by a lion or bitten by a cobra snake, so forth and so on. And they find that there was no compatible mate for Adam. God then puts Adam to sleep, takes a rib, and then fashions a woman from Adam. Fashions a woman from Adam. And then he brings the woman to Adam, and we're going to read Adam's response. Okay? Adam's response. So let me go back. I want to kind of read. So verse 19, well, I'm going to just pick it up in verse 21. So the Lord God caused a deep sleep to come over the man, and he slept, and God took one of his ribs and closed the flesh at that place. Then the Lord God made the rib he had taken from the man into the woman and brought her to the man. So right here, when we talk about marriage, I'm asking, and we're going to we're going to talk a couple of sessions on marriage, and I think it's important that we do start it from this perspective. Okay. So notice we said that everything about what marriage is, which would mean everything that makes man happy. And now, and understand that question. Everything that would make man happy. So you have to start with how God created man. It's kind of interesting. One of the most fantastic wonders, right? Curiosities is what's on other planets. One of the most amazing things is that there are people who, there has been talk about trying to get some kind of travel. I believe it's Jupiter. It might be Mars. Either one is right, just out of our range. However, there are people who, and this was a serious kind of thing. There are people who are talking about traveling to one of those planets. And the idea was to travel to the planet. They would then set up, terraform, set up a place that then ultimately, live on one of the planets. Now it's kind of interesting because in this travel, of course, those who would volunteer to go, it would be a one-way trip. Because once you fly and get out there, you couldn't get back. It was amazing how many people, women included, that were willing to leave their husbands to go on this trip. So here's my point of saying, bringing this up. No, I would never go to Mars if Mars was the only a one-way trip. That would take, of course, years to get there, right? Which, of course, we don't even have the technology yet. But the very fact that there were people willing to do that. And let me tell you why. Because God did not create us to live on the moon, on the Mars, everything else. God did not create us for that. We're created for the earth. Which means this. We are going to be the most happiest on the earth. Just like in terms of relationships, there is no other greater relationship than what God had created with the woman. Now, with any animal, any creature, only the woman. So in order to be happy, we first have to understand what God created, what was God's plan, and what is God's purpose. So when Eve is brought to Adam, understand the very first thing is God is the one who brings her. God is the one who made her. Of course, remember, it was God the one who even says it is not good for the man to be alone. We start with that because this is how God created man. Now, the idea of the idea of I'm not going to well, probably the idea of same-sex relationships. So I'm not going to spend too much time on that because this is something probably even more so in our time. There's always been homosexuality. Here's my point, that this is something that is outside of the God-ordained relationship. So that if we have the discussion with gays, and especially Christian gays, see, right here you can see we can understand what God created. Okay, right here we can see what God created to understand what his plan and purpose is. Now keep this in mind, the whole gay thing is outside, it's in the, we're getting into that into the fall of man. So keep that in mind. And why, that the gay community wants Christians to fall in line with them when they don't need Christianity, since they're not interested in serving God, they're interested in God serving them. See, in other words, look, I know I'm jumping ahead and I'm really diverting here from this, but I think these thoughts are very important because right here, what it's talking about. But if you understand this, as Christians, help us understand, again, God's purpose. But when a gay person who now wants the Christian community, see, because there's nothing stopping them from being gay, having whatever relationships they choose. There's nothing stopping them from doing that. I think there's a more sinister plot at bay, and that at foot here, and that is they want the church to submit to them, and that's why you have gay Christian ministries, gay friendly churches, and they try to use the Bible. They would even say that we have gotten it wrong in the Bible by saying that we have kind of misinterpreted scriptures, which, okay, it's just plain silly. See, the issue here is they are coming to God saying, God, this is what I demand from you. Instead of, God, here's how I'm feeling. This is what I'm struggling with. I'm asking you as the creator, my Lord, my God, what would you have of me? That's not what they're doing. So, first and foremost, they're not interested in a biblical worldview. They're only interested in misusing it for their own purpose. Okay. So when we come to this, though, for our understanding, we certainly can understand biology, science, right? Just by in forensics, okay? Just by what did God create? See, what did God create? Think about that. What did God create? So here we see God takes the rib from a man. And this is what he doesn't do. He doesn't create another man. Right? He doesn't create another man. What God creates is a female, a woman with female parts. So he creates a woman that has a certain shape. Breasts, hips, a vagina. Vagina is extremely important, right? Why is the vagina extremely important? Because the male genitals and the female genitals merge together in an awesome way. That's the difference. Now you may say, can two same-sex people do that? Well, yeah, right? People masturbate. Look, I'm sorry if some of you guys are kind of squirmish over this, but I'm sorry. This is life as we deal with it. Have you watched the late night infomercials where there is just one network after another advertising sex toys? And my thing is, with sex toys, well, of course you can gratify yourself, but I don't think you can satisfy yourself because it's just a sex toy. So I think one of the problems is, again, if we look at what did God create, let's start with that. What did God create? And that is where we're going to find our happiness, right? So look at what Adam says right here. And the Lord God, verse 22 again, the Lord God made the rib taken from the man into a woman. Notice he didn't make another man. He made a woman and brought her to the man. So you got two different bodies here. All right. And the man said, this at last, you can probably only assume he's referring to his search throughout the entire animal kingdom here. But anyway, he said, this one at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman, for she was taken from man. So, right here, what makes, when we say God's definition of marriage, look at verse 24 again. This is why man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife, and they become one flesh. Both the man and the woman were naked, yet felt no shame. We'll get back to those things later. Notice he says here, this is what Adam now says. You can even say Adam is the head of the human earth, right? Head of the human race. And notice now what he pronounces. He pronounces the names of every creature. But now notice what he pronounces with the woman. This is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. This one will be called woman, for she was taken from man. So that's what the word woman means, taken from man. Okay, so now he makes a very interesting statement here, right in verse 24. This is why a man leaves his father and mother and bonds with his wife. We'll get back to that, because that's a very interesting statement that he's making at this point. Right, he doesn't have to make it, right, because he already has his woman that was taken from his flesh. We'll get back to that in a moment. Later, I should say. So his response to the woman is, she is bone of my bone. Now, this, in the idea of, when we talk about then, what is God's definition of the marriage? It is the connection, the unity of flesh, two becoming one flesh. Now, this is why, of course, with Adam and Eve, before the fall, they would have lived in a perpetual adult life. They would not have aged, right? So they would not have had all of the other challenges that we face. But notice that from the physical perspective here, from the physical perspective, right, the physical perspective, God's definition of marriage is one flesh. One flesh. This one at last is bone of my bone and flesh of my flesh. So right here, this is what marriage is about. Now, I have had people say all kinds of things about what marriage is. All kinds of things. And not one of them is, to me, right. So, for example, people will say marriage is a covenant, a spiritual covenant, and yada, 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 yada. All that, no. For marriage is one thing as God had created it. Marriage is one thing as God has created it. One flesh. And understand that this one flesh is, so think about your arm, for example. If I cut your arm off, there's a lot of pain there, isn't there? Because it's what? Your arm is one with your entire body. Marriage is a physical, understand that, a physical bond. Not a spiritual bond, a physical bond. And that is why death, okay, terminates that relationship. Of course, we're going to pick this up in the next study. All right, guys. See you guys in the next study. All right.